All right, we're back once again with another review. This time, the sequel to Who Killed the Electric Car? Revenge of the Electric Car. So, the first one we talked about was released in 2006. That was like super early as far as electric vehicles and a lot of this stuff. And we talked about it in the previous review. This was a kind of eye-opening thing to me. The sequel, Revenge of the Electric Car, came out in 2011. The EV market was a little bit more mature, but even at that stage in 2011, Jeff, had you even been thinking about electric vehicles?
No, I think probably in that time Tesla was like a thing I had heard about. I'm like, oh hey, this
Yeah.
this guy doing this, and I'm into space
Mm-hmm.
news and stuff. So I had heard of SpaceX. So you heard about it, but I couldn't have told you like, hey, this is the model that they're coming out with. This is the Roadster. Maybe I saw it on like a Jay Leno thing or
Yeah.
something like that. That would have been like the extent of like my knowledge at that point.
Yeah. And this documentary is very interesting to look back at it from the 2020 standpoint because of who Elon Musk is. And this one has a pretty heavy focus on Tesla, GM, and then Nissan, and kind of their battles between the GM had the Volt, Nissan had the Leaf, and then Tesla with the Roadster. And the Roadster was what kind of started the company of Tesla, and they had a pretty good plan of, all right, we're going to make the really expensive car, then we're going to use the profits from that one to make the less expensive car, and then the less expensive, like, so they just kind of go went down the line. But the Roadster is what started it all. And the documentary follows, like, it picks up right after 2006 when the first one came out, and it goes from 2007 to the end of 2010. And kind of also a big thing was the 2008 recession and how
Right.
that kind of impacted everything. Um,
The
so,
government having to step in and save GM. They mentioned that, and
mhm.
the large chunk of the movie. To me, the more interesting part is once you get past that stuff and you get to Elon,
Yeah.
essentially.
And who he is now, he was not in 2010, 2011, around that time frame. He was not as well known as he is now. He's one of the richest men in the world now, thanks to Tesla. So, your thoughts on Revenge of the Electric Car versus the first one, Jeff? Who killed the
Yeah.
electric car?
So at first I think to tag back onto our old review, like this thing is much more in line with what I want to see, and also like I think just more interesting because it's more recent,
Yeah.
and you're looking at like actual Teslas at this point.
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing like, hey, here's what's coming. Um, Also, minimal corniness. I think that is, the first one's a little corny for my taste, but this one is not. And I think this even shows like this is like, hey, this is serious. Like these cars look like, this is like a cool looking car, and then even later on when they get into the Model S, is near the end because it's about to be unveiled and they're going to show it,
Right.
and he's discussing, being nervous and everything about showing it or being tired of trying to sell the car. There's it's an interesting, like, this is not that long ago. This is 9 years ago or so, 10 years ago, let's say, for filming, and these guys are like, oh, the Model S is vaporware. It's never going to come out. This thing is just, conceptually being shown. Who knows
Mm-hmm.
what's going to go on with this? And then cut to X amount of years later, people have those. And, we've actually ridden in some 2013 Model S's,
Right.
so like this thing did come to fruition. But I think overall, yeah, I think the documentary is better than the first. And I think it's very interesting because you get to see some behind the scenes, like you see Elon talking about having a breakdown. Like he's like, that's the closest I came to having like a mental breakdown
Right.
was this moment, and he's saying it in the moment, and then it's like, hey, 10 years later, buddy, you're gonna have a beast on your hands.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Like I said, looking back at it from the lens of 2020, and for me in particular, that was kind of the reason why I wanted to watch it, because I didn't watch this one as it came out like I did the original. I did not hear about this sequel for a long time afterwards. I just, I don't know. I never heard anyone talking about it like I did the first one. So, not seeing it as it came out, watching it maybe a few years later, even then, getting a little bit of. Actually, I think I watched it last year now that I think about it. But getting some perspective on Elon, who he was, and that's what made it interesting for me, because that's kind of one of the biggest reasons why I got a Tesla. Is I feel like the leadership, the management, everybody who's in charge at Tesla, and you could see kind of the difference in this documentary with the GM and Nissan heads at that time. It's just crazy how the guys in charge, the heads of these companies, can either tank the business or, make them to record profits, make you one of the richest men in the world, and then it's all like decision making, and then who can actually execute. Like you said, vaporware. Like, oh, those guys, those doubters, exist even today, and it's crazy to me to see skeptics of like, okay, it's here, it's out, it's available, and people are still like, oh no, Tesla's doing the wrong things. They're not doing lidar. They're doing different, automation. And actually, that would be an interesting follow up for this as well. Is okay, now that we have the electric stuff, it's here. It's almost a foregone conclusion at this point that it's going to take over for ICE vehicles. Yeah. So that's not the point of these documentaries. Was more of to get electric, to get into alternative fuel vehicles. But now that we know that electric is kind of going to be the thing, what happens with autonomous? What happens with self-driving cars? That would be my interest, and that would be what I would want to see in a follow-up.
And I think also on that, just to add to that, I think another thing interesting in a follow-up would be who are the main competitors? Like, I don't think GM has a serious competitor right now. I'm not following every single news that comes out of that company, but you see a lot of like, hey, we have an electric Mustang.
Yeah.
We have a lot of this, a lot of that, but you don't see a lot of people acting on it. And I feel like if you don't have one, or like, what are the Toyotas doing of the world? Where's their electric car? Like, it's clearly coming at this point, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's also interesting that these other companies, all of I think their focus has been on, okay, let's make a great ICE vehicle, let's make a great gas car, and the engineering has to be different for electric. So trying to pivot and shift I think that's why we're seeing a lot of GM and Ford failures at this point versus Tesla and some of the definitely not Nikola, because that's they're going down in flames. But I'm thinking of Rivian, which is there's that, actually, you know what, we might talk about this on a future episode. There's that documentary with Ewan McGregor where he's driving up and down South America, or up actually up South America in electric bikes, electric motorcycles. Okay. And Rivian is a big part of that documentary, so we may talk about that on a future one. But I think they're the only competitors right now in Tesla's rear view. I think the big automakers, the established manufacturers, Volkswagen is, I think, the closest. But GM has had, ever since that EV1, they've had like that EV presence, and then they went into the Volt and the Bolt. And I was actually, before I got a Tesla, the ones that I was looking at were what was in this documentary: the Leaf from Nissan, and then the Bolt and the Volt. And I test drove, because the Volt is, now I'm getting them confused. One of them is a plug-in, and so it's a hybrid, half electric, half gas. The other one is all electric. So I was looking at those, but there's a number of reasons why I didn't go with them, from price to looks to the heads of their companies. There's a bunch of reasons why I didn't go there. But yeah, all of these things I kind of was looking at as I was gonna buy my next vehicle, and this documentary is like right in that wheelhouse. So
Mhm.
it was interesting to see not only kind of the shift in focus in this documentary to those three that we talked about, kind of GM, Tesla, and Nissan, but also the personalities of each head. And that's what I think really is fascinating to me was Elon Musk, Bob Lutz, and then the Carlos. We have a problem pronouncing his name, Gosen or
I think it's Gomes, like
Gon.
that. Yeah.
All those guys, their personalities and their management styles and what they thought was, oh yeah, this is going to be the future. You know, I'm right, you're wrong. I'm smart, you're dumb. Like all
Right.
of those things taken into account. That was what
Yeah.
I found interesting about this documentary.
Yeah, and as I say, I think on top of that too, like you could see, I think it's worth if you watch this to Google each of those guys,
Oh
like
yeah,
they've ended up and see what's happened.
yeah.
Every one of even Elon, in certain circumstances, but those guys, like you see, especially the GM CEO, and maybe I have vested interest in this because, like, I have family that works for GM. It was like what my family worked in, but back in Ohio and stuff, and it's to see him, he seems to take it serious, but if you look at it, his quotes outside of this that were not presented in this documentary, I don't think ever truly bought into it, even though I think that Volt they show in this movie is one of the best looking electric cars that I've seen. Like it looks nice. It looks like a car I would buy.
Yeah.
Regardless of whatever's powering it, right? Like it looks like a decent car. And I think it's interesting to see the face I feel like they're putting on for this documentary a little bit, and for the idea of, hey, we're being progressive and making something for the future,
Right.
and then what is actually happening where they seem to not believe in the technology, or they don't believe in the pollution and global warming aspects.
Right.
It's more of and I guess to their hey, they're businessmen, they should focus on the business, but I think it's interesting to see what they do here, and then what actually happens, their actual quotes. And lawsuits that happen to these guys later. I feel like it's definitely worth watching this and then Googling these guys,
Right.
and seeing, looking more into who they are.
Yeah, it's always interesting seeing like when it was happening, like you were saying, the footage of Elon as it's happening, and then looking at the results of what happened later, having that crystal ball looking into the future. So
Right.
I think this one was another good documentary by the director Chris Payne, and he has a documentary on artificial intelligence that I haven't watched yet, but I wanted to check that one out. This movie is not as widely available as the first one that we talked about on our last video. It mostly is available for purchase on all the digital platforms, so not as widely available, but I recommend this one just as much as the first one, especially if you're watching this channel. You have an interest already in these things, so
Yes.
I would
And I feel like
recommend it.
see, I feel like this one is superior to the first one, just in a bunch of aspects. But I
Yeah.
just find the newsworthiness of it more interesting. I feel like the behind the scenes look is better. You're looking into the companies, like what they're actively doing, rather than what they tried to kill in the past. I would highly recommend the second one. It's really good.
Yeah. And I would highly recommend you hitting the like button on this video and all of our videos, subscribing to our channel, and hitting the notification bell so you can get notified anytime we put out a new video. Jeff and I will be back for some more electric fun, and we will continue to say goodbye to gasoline.